Hello, everyone. Well, let's just start by doing a little bit of review on what the homework's asking for. We can kind of continue from there by looking at some musical examples in like pop music, for instance, to kind of see how these answers manifest. But we can kind of look through these. Incidentally, if anyone has any questions about any questions about any of the questions, I'll see if I can provide some sort of answer. But with that being said, we looked at the first one last time. It's the same note as the structure right before. You kind of look at it in context, right? It's repeating, or it's anticipating the repeat, right? It's like the first note of the repeat. So actually, this ends up being an anticipation. Well, that's one way you can kind of think about this, right? We looked at number 2. Let's just look a little further ahead. Let's see. Right? So this could be multiple answers. From the standpoint that, well, this one's kind of tricky, right? Let's just think about what this could be. Any ideas for what this could be? Because I will accept multiple answers. I guess if you explain yourself, that's the most important thing. So it's not really a passing tone, right? Because there isn't this sense that it's moving in one direction, right? It's moving down and up, right? Things like that. Chat. That's one. Okay. Someone in the chat wrote retardation. Someone in the chat wrote rearticulated suspension. One thing I could accept, actually, a suspension has to resolve downwards, but a retardation resolves upwards. So this could be something, it's not even on our slides, but it could be a rearticulated retardation. That's a hard thing to say. Rearticulated retardation. That's a lot of syllables. In the sense that it is basically a suspension, like this is basically a non-chord tone that was a chord tone. Well, actually, it really kind of wasn't. It wasn't really a chord tone in the previous measure. So actually, I don't know if this is the best answer. If this were a suspension, this would be consonant in the previous measure. But, you know, it's probably one of the answers I will accept, just because this isn't extremely easy to think about. Let's just think about some other possibilities. This has a little bit of a neighboring tone motion, right? In the sense that you descend and then you repeat the note and then you ascend again, except there's a repeat in there that's kind of throwing it off. What this is getting me to think this is, which is unfortunately, I feel like the answer to this question could be the Appoggiatura, which is confusing. So let's actually look at chords on one note and let's look at the non-harmonic tones. And actually, here is one case. It can be approached by the same note and then resolved downwards and upwards. So basically, an Appoggiatura can be this. It's like the most classic definition that kind of agrees with most of the characterizations we give it. Is this a non-harmonic tone that appears with the chord on a strong beat? There are, I mean, and this kind of disagrees with this definition. I know it does. But all of the other, like, it's kind of like we have to pick which definition we look at. This characteristic appoggiatura, where you approach it by, where you approach or approached by leap and resolve and step in the opposite direction, is kind of, well, we can look at it here. It's a non-harmonic tone that appears with the chord on a strong beat, and it resolves by step in the opposite direction. But if we just hold up, like if we don't pay attention to the part about the skip and then leaving by step in the opposite direction, and we just pay attention to the part that kind of pertains to a non-harmonic tone that appears on the chord on a strong beat, and then maybe also resolves by step, you could see that even though that this doesn't, even this is the example in the homework actually, even if this doesn't actually kind of arrive by leap, it's still resolving by step, and it still has a non-harmonic tone on a strong beat. So that is basically satisfying some of the criteria for appoggiatura. And it also kind of satisfies the criteria for kind of the ornamental appoggiatura that we were looking at. It's basically like if you have this little Q note, when this gets like interpreted, it basically gets interpreted in these two possible ways, where basically this is a non-chord tone and it basically gets rendered on a strong beat. It basically gets rendered on the main beat, this little tiny Q note, and then the actual like big note head gets rendered on kind of the secondary or weaker kind of beat. So basically in appoggiatura, it's just think about it as a dissonance on a strong beat, and it can be arrived at by leap in the most characteristic sense and resolved by step in the opposite direction. But oftentimes when you have these situations where you're not exactly sure what it could be, just think about the possibility that it might actually be an appoggiatura. And it's unfortunate that it has so many definitions, but it does indeed. And that's just something we have to live with. But it is, I mean, it's unfortunate that these aren't separated into separate terms. It's not the fact that it has multiple definitions that's the problem. It's the fact that it's the fact that each one of these constructs don't have their own name. But the construct itself is kind of a unique, interesting phenomenon. Like it's interesting to contemplate this motion, and hopefully it's just getting you to think by process of elimination of what it could be. And in the process, you're kind of cementing ideas about melody and movement. And that's the most important thing. That's why I'm accepting multiple answers. So just, it might be a good idea just to kind of justify your answer. And I'll pass a note along to the TAs to kind of explain some of this stuff. But anyway, so let's take a look at this. Okay. Okay. This is trying to trick you. Okay. What would this normally be? Or actually, you know what? This could potentially be a few answers. But I mean, what is the most obvious answer that comes to mind with this motion right here? If this is a chord tone, and then you're going down and then back up, what is the most obvious answer?
Lower neighbor.
Lower neighbor, right? What kind of throws this off a little bit potentially is the fact that this is chromatic in nature. It's almost like a chromatic lower neighbor, right? Because this doesn't exist in the key. It's not a term that we explicitly talked about, but if you want it to be explicit, you could say that. Yeah, so anyway, straightforward enough. So let's, and then, you know, you can kind of figure out what this is, right? Same exercise, just different structure. Let's see. Wait, that's not right. I guess that is right. Interesting. Okay. So what you have to do here is you have to, I mean, what does the question ask you? I mean, I guess what is the secondary question that I wrote ask you? Do these circled red notes, do these black notes circled in red fit within the E flat major triad that's basically described over here? So an E flat major triad has which notes? E flat, G, B flat, right? So then we're kind of looking at this and we're thinking, well, what's going on here? This is moving up and then it's skipping down. Are these what I'm asking is this A flat fit with an E flat major chord? A flat is A flat in an E flat major triad? No, it's not, right? How about F? Is F in an E flat major triad? It's not, right? So we have two notes that are not chord tones. Okay. There's a name for this kind of situation, a neighbor group, because you basically have the upper neighbor and then you have the lower neighbor, and so it's a neighbor group. You can also call them double neighbors, because you have both neighbor notes in order. So you're basically like, it's like they're throwing you a surprise party. They're conspiring against you. They're not including you in the communication, but they're communicating with themselves. And it works out because you still have this relationship of the original note. So even though these are two dissonant notes, you still have the context of the original note to anchor these two dissonances in a consonant realm. Okay. So anyway, there's lots and lots of questions here. Some of these are more obvious, right? These are just simple questions. These are pretty simple. Pay attention, I guess, when you see these little cue notes, that you observe the specifics of this. So like if you see a slash through this, or if you don't see a slash through that, right? But I mean, these are definitions. So I'd say the first part of it is pretty the hardest part. Then these parts you can just reference to the one note and be like, oh, neighbor group, and just research the slide. What makes a passing tone an accented passing tone? Well, let's just process of eliminate this. Does an accented passing tone occur on a weak beat? No, right? A passing tone normally occurs on a weak beat, but an accented passing tone doesn't. Is it followed by a cadence? Well, might be, but it's not like an inherent property of it. Does it have a trill? Not an inherent property. It occurs on a strong beat? Well, maybe. Well, anyway, hopefully that gives you an idea. Process of elimination is a good strategy. But yeah, the first part is the hardest part, but hopefully this gets you thinking. With that being said, let's actually pull up an example from some music. Let's just see if we can find some, okay? Okay, I thought about you. Ooh, this is actually these jazz melodies become a little more tricky to analyze. So let's just take a look at this E, okay? Now remember, we're in a mode of analysis where we're trying not to consider the notes as part of the chord. Like we're trying to look for disagreements between notes and underlying chords. An alternate mode of analysis would try to analyze the chords with these melody notes in them, but that's an alternate mode of analysis. We're looking for disagreements. We're being argumentative, I guess. So right here, this FAC, do these three notes fit into an F6? They do, right? So then what about this E? Does it fit into a B dominant 7? It doesn't, right? So what would you call this? You're basically leaping to a non-chord tone on a strong beat. So the non-harmonic tone is accented. What is a structure that has an accented, that has a chord tone, basically on a strong beat? A non-chord tone on a strong beat. What is the structure that we looked at? Appoggiatura. Exactly. So Appoggiatura has that property, right? So it's on this beat, and then it's chromatically moving down. And then what's interesting about this note is normally an appoggiatura resolves to the note, like in a chord, but it does this chromatic passing movement. Because this note's also not in the chord. So, but this note is. Okay, so this B flat, does this B flat fit into a D dominant 7? No. So in some ways, this is an accented neighbor tone, right? An accented neighbor tone in that you're moving up to a non-chord tone and then moving back down. But a lot of times, honestly, an accented neighbor tone is quite similar to an appoggiatura. So like you could call it an accented neighbor tone or like an appoggiatura, really. Like I think both definitions work just fine. And then what about this? This A, does it fit into this G dominant 7 chord? No, right? We're looking for disagreements. So we're basically saying, no, it does not fit into the chord. And so if we were to consider this as not part of the chord, we could think of this as basically being, well, non-chord tone on a strong beat. It's approached by the same note. It's resolved by skip. So what's something that is, I mean, truth be told, we're not going to find a clean answer here. I can already tell. But what's something that is approached by step that we know of? Sorry, what's something that's approached by the same note that we know of? And let's just see if that works.
Suspension.
Suspension, right? So there's something about this that's kind of suspension, like in the sense that it's like rearticulated. You're in the sense it's consonant on this beat, but it's dissonant on this beat. But then suspensions normally resolve by step. They resolve by step downwards, and retardations usually resolve by steps upwards. But this resolves by leap. So what's something that resolves by leap? There's a term that we have that resolves by leap, a melodic construction that resolves by leap. Escape tones. So it's almost like, see, I told you, we're not going to get a clean analysis in this with this particular construction, and at least with the terms that we've studied so far. But hopefully it's still illuminating to kind of ponder it, because the terms we've listed are pretty much very straightforward to think about for the most part. Appoggiaturas are a little confusing, but they're pretty straightforward things to consider. So what we have here is basically we have this kind of like suspension motion, rearticulated suspension motion here, but then we've got this this kind of escape motion where you're kind of resolving to a chord tone on a different by leaping. But normally escape tones happen on weak beats. So this happens on a strong beat. So this is like an accented escape tone in some ways, but escape tones are normally, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be something that could be. But normally they're approached by step. So it's kind of an incomplete definition, honestly. But really, I mean, what's complicating the situation is the fact that we're really gung-ho on treating these notes as not being part of these chords. Like that's our mode of analysis right now. We're deliberately trying to find disagreements between notes and chords. But in reality, here's something that's interesting about jazz chords in general. In jazz chords, there's something called implied extensions. Okay, so let me actually see if I can actually create a new slide. And this is something that you're not going to be tested on necessarily, but it's something good to know. In fact, let me actually just put this in the jazz chords itself. Okay. So basically, implied extensions. So if you have basically, let's say, let me actually just open this up. Let's say you have something like this. Whoops. You have, whoops. You have a C dominant 7, right? Okay. Now, what you let's actually start with, for simplicity, let me just start with a C minor 7. C minor 7. So what a jazz player can actually do is they can actually add notes that will sound consonant with the structure. And those are basically called the upper tensions. And the upper tensions are basically the 9s, the 11s, and the 13s, okay? So it turns out that the 9 and the 11 and the 13 are all consonant with this particular, there's a certain 9, a certain 11, and a certain 13 that's consonant with this particular chord right here. One second, let me shut my door. Okay, so what you have basically is this. These are potential extensions that could work nicely. Basically, you have the 9, the 11, and the 13. If I took these notes and actually technically I want to bring them up an octave, right? 9, 11, 13, these pair nicely with these chords. In fact, these are the implied, let's see. These are, but you know what? Give me one sec. This 75. These are the implied extensions. Meaning, what I'm getting at is, if I were reading a chord chart, like what we were looking at over here, and I saw a C minor 7, and then I saw basically, I was looking for the notes that were explicitly in this G minor 7, like basically this underlying chord, right? Underlying 7th. chord, right? Basically, let's say I was looking for I was just trying to find whatever melodic note. I was trying to determine if the melodic note in the chord chart that I was looking at fit within this underlying seventh chord. It would be less flexible than if I also kind of considered if the melodic note that I'm analyzing fit within one of these implied extensions. So that kind of raises the flexibility a little bit. So for instance, like when I was looking at this A actually is a ninth, okay? A ninth actually is consonant with kind of a more expanded version of this chord. It's kind of like a chord tone that is an extension of this particular chord. It would be a G9, right? Instead of a G7. So in that sense, this would be a chord tone. So I'm not like, it kind of sits odd with me to think of this as a dissonance in the classic sense, because this actually is consonant in some sense. In the jazz sense of, we're still stacking thirds on top of this chord, and we're using those thirds kind of as part of our analysis. So this kind of begs the question in terms of what you define the chord to be. So in jazz contexts, there's this idea that people label chords in like the most simple representation often without accounting for extensions, because that gives a player more freedom to kind of experiment. And it also makes you have to do less work when writing out full chords and potentially creating a framework that agrees with more notes. Because if you wrote explicit voicings out, if you put a 9 here, then you might want to write a chord symbol for every single note, right? But this is kind of a catch-all for all of these notes. It's kind of approximating the kind of tonality of these particular notes. So you don't have to necessarily be so explicit with all of the extensions. You can kind of imply them. As a player, I know I have these available to me, and I can kind of play them if I'd like to. But there's it kind of complicates the analysis a little bit for sure in the domain of jazz. So let's look at some, and I actually, to be honest, I have a sense for what these are, but I always forget exactly what they are because I kind of know intuitively know what they are. But let's do the major 7 really quickly. And there's charts that kind of explain these online. Okay, so this right here would be a C major 7. Right? Did I do that right? No, I didn't. Okay. And what I would be able to use for extensions for this chord would be this. Okay. I would be able to use 9, sharp 11, and 13. Now, why not the 11? Why couldn't I use the regular 11? Well, this kind of hinges on this idea. I don't know if you remember me telling you this or not, but there's this idea that minor ninths are dissonant, right? If you recall when I was talking about that, minor ninths, basically this interval right here, it's a dissonant interval. So when we're constructing jazz chords, one of the operating principles is that we're trying to create structures that avoid that interval, at least as an inside interval, meaning like this sounds fine. It's the minor ninth, you can see it on the piano, is on the outside, right? But if I did this, these two notes are a minor ninth, and that's a dissonance. That's why basically I was playing this just now. And that would create a dissonance. But if I did this, there's no minor ninth anymore. I mean, this probably, if you've never heard jazz before, this probably still sounds a little strange to you, but it's not as dissonant as this, arguably. So when you're basically performing and you see this particular, if you're improvising and you see this chord symbol, the available implied extensions that you can play are the 9, the sharp 11, and the 13. So these are available to you So, I mean, this goes back to the kind of chord chart I was showing you. As a jazz player, I'm just looking at so many notes that we're describing as non-chord tones. And really in my head, I'm like, that doesn't sit right with me because I can see them fitting in as kind of extensions, as kind of like this is almost like the most explicit way you can write the chord. And very seldom, especially in jazz, do people restrict voicings to only utilize the underlying seventh chords. These implied extensions are usually favorable in jazz contexts to improvise over. They're not, but it kind of depends, right? If you're looking at a rock chart or you're looking at a pop chart and there's a minor seventh chord, you might want to keep it as a minor seventh chord. You might not want to jazz it up, so to speak, by adding these extensions. Because they'd be like, wow, that doesn't sound like the Beach Boys anymore. That sounds like Bill Evans or Miles Davis, right? So you have to be a little careful. Like it kind of depends on the context. The reason I'm doing this here is because this song, to some degree, is a jazz standard, and but I mean, this type of melodic analysis, you can kind of experiment with kind of including these extensions or not including them in your analysis. It's really, the analysis is meant to serve you, to help you determine something about the music and to kind of help you understand. So there's not really a right or wrong mode of analysis. It's just really like unpacking the structures in a way that can help you decipher the music. So for me, I was thinking, I wasn't really like too keen on like being like, well, this is like a half escape tone and a half rearticulated suspension. I was like, well, this to me just feels like a chord tone that's like an extension and going to another chord tone. So it's like you use the analysis that like best suits the music that you're looking at. And so this is kind of a disclaimer, right? So we've looked at some of these. We've looked at minor sevenths, major sevenths. Now, dominant sevenths are really flexible in terms of what extensions you can use. So flexible, in fact, that I'm sure I've forgotten all of the ones. Well, I mean, it's not that I've forgotten them. It's just that there's a certain pairing of them that you have to use. So like for dominant sevenths, I believe you can use like multiple variants of all of them. So like for instance, let me just do this. I'll make this first and I'll test my theory. It's not looking pretty, I know. Oh man, there's even more. It won't even let me type them. Like I'm trying to put 3 Ds here. It won't even let me do it. It doesn't like that. It's basically, let me just look this up really quickly. Extensions. Let's see. Extensions, dominant seventh chord. Implied extensions. It's not giving me there's charts of this available. I'm trying to find it. Oh, maybe this is it. The jazz piano site. I think this is it. It's too bad. Well, I mean, I could keep looking this up, but I'm confident I know the answer to this. So I'm just going to play it. It's just too bad that I can't render it on the score, which is a bummer. So I guess like let me just create a new couple of measures and I'll just this is the problem I'm facing. I'll just show you a couple of variants, okay? So for instance, you could do this. And so this would be, I guess, first, let me just say that this is a C dominant 7. And what you have here is basically a 9, sharp 11, 13. Okay. Let me show you the Jimi Hendrix chord. So this is the Jimi Hendrix chord. Sharp 9. Whoops. Basically has that sharp 9 in it, right? So over here you can see that there's a sharp 9. Over here you see that there's a regular 9. Okay. I could keep going. Like I'll just keep creating possibilities. So for instance, right here, I could do something like this. Wait a second. Oh, yeah. So over here, what I've got is basically, what do I have here? Sorry, give me one sec. What do I have over here?
Flat 9.
Flat 9. What's next?
Sharp 11.
Sharp 11.
And a 13.
13, right? So I mean, so far I've had a flat 9, a sharp 9. I haven't shown you a regular 11 yet, but regular 11 doesn't work well because of the minor ninth clash. But I can. There's just so many things. Then we get into polychords with dominant chords, like. So there's just a ton of things you can do with these particular dominant chords. Depending on the context, you can kind of treat many different notes as kind of being extensions of the original chord. But let's kind of change gears. Let's look at some music, but let's go to the pop book, the real pop book, and see if we can find something a little more regulated. Okay. Let's see. I'm just gonna go to the index. Any picks? Okay, maybe Drops of Jupiter. Do you know that song? Or
Yes.
okay, Drops of Jupiter. It's been a long time since I've heard this song. Tell me. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Doesn't the song do that? Or am I thinking of another song? Maybe I'm thinking of, oh no, it's right here. Tell me, did you sweep across the sun? Okay, right. Okay. So let's see. So why don't we look at this particular part right here? This is actually very well regulated for the purpose of our kind of classical analysis. So we have a C major chord. Now let's look at all these notes. E, 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 E. Chord tones, right? Then it goes down to this D and then back up to this E. What is this? Looks like a V, right? Non-chord tone here, right? Unless we're considering this as a jazz chord, which we're not. It's just a neighbor tone, right? And so we have a neighbor tone, da da, chord tone. Ah, look at that. This is a very good example of what we've been studying. It's easier than actually what's on the homework, to be honest. So what we have here is this D. This D doesn't fit with a C major chord, right? Doesn't, right? It's like it's certainly not like part of the core chord. It might be an extension, but we're not considering that, right? So, but does this D fit in with this subsequent chord? It's tied over. So any ideas of what this could be? Guys, the anticipation is killing me. Oh, it's in anticipation. I that's the only opportunity. Sorry, I gave it away. It's the only opportunity I had to make that joke. So it's an anticipation, right? Because this D fits in with this G major chord, but it doesn't fit in with the C major chord. We're anticipating it. And it's actually, anticipations are easy to spot in this sense because they're rhythmically tied. So you're basically anticipating the next chord. So let this anticipation kill you no longer. So then we have this, what do we have here? The C. Is the C, oh, someone said anticipation in the chat. Unless they, I don't know who said it, if I said it first or if they anticipated my anticipation, I don't know. But anyway, so I have basically this note, it's a chord tone, right? What about this note? Oh, maybe you were pointing, maybe you thought you were calling this an anticipation. This right here is a neighbor tone. And then this right here, what about this note? This is just a chord tone. This is rhythmically anticipated, right? But from a chord tone perspective, this is you get what I mean? Like this is rhythmically anticipated, but this is a chord tone. Like an anticipation is a chord tone, or it's a type of note it's a type of melody note, like when we describe it as an anticipation. So we have to kind of be careful with the terminology, because someone could say that this is anticipated, because this is anticipated, but this isn't like the classic definition of an anticipation, because you'd have to be a non-chord tone to be an anticipation, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Interesting. So what do we have here? Okay, we have a chord tone. And then what do we have here? This is not a chord tone, right? So in our classical kind of analysis, which often breaks down, and in fact, it breaks down even in the classical examples we were looking at, we expect these non-chord tones to kind of manage themselves in a way where they resolve to chord tones slightly thereafter. So when we get these situations where these are emphasized, we don't really have a framework to think about them. So this is just like these two things I would consider as the same note, just articulated twice, the same non-chord tone rearticulated, right? But it's cool. You're really calling out that dissonance. Okay. Okay. Then what about this? Is this a chord tone? Is this D part of an F major chord?
No.
It's not, right? So what about the C? The C is, right? So this is an accented non-chord tone. So one of the places your mind should probably go is Appoggiatura. You could call this like an accented neighbor tone, but it's not exactly correct, right? Because a neighbor, by calling it an accented neighbor tone, you're expecting the previous note to be a chord tone. But in this case, the previous note was not a chord tone. So I think this is maybe Appoggiatura is the best definition. And I say best definition because obviously it's a little gray. There's a little bit of gray area there with disagreements over the definition. And then these are all chord tones. Okay. And then what about this? So one of the things, right. One of the things that I could say about this is that this is in some ways an incomplete structure. Because it's dissonant here, and then it's consonant as the repeated note. No, it's not. So it's just repeating the dissonance. Right? It just keeps repeating this dissonant note. And as a result of repeating, we don't really have a framework for, at least we haven't developed a framework for thinking about it because it's just, we're expecting it to resolve, right? So if you think of this whole unit as one note instead of repeated notes, then this would be a passing tone. These non-chord tones kind of follow this passing tone motion, right? But there's just many instances of this particular note, right? So right, so if you can group the notes together and kind of think of them as passing. It's kind of repeated of a pass. It's a repeated passing tone. This is a passing tone. It's a repeated passing tone, and then it resolves to the chord tone. And then this is basically a repeated neighbor tone, I guess you could call it. This is a neighbor tone, right? This is the same tone, so it's repeated, but you can kind of think of them conceptually as the same pitch. And then it goes back to the chord tone, right? Now, what about this note right here? We're in the C major chord. What would this D be in terms of a C major chord? It would be a non-chord tone, right? A D would be a non-chord tone in relation to C major. But a D is tied over, and this D in terms of a G major chord functions as a chord tone. So therefore, this is known as what?
Is it preparation?
Not a preparation, because a preparation, you're thinking in the right direction, because you're thinking if this is kind of a suspension, but the suspension would be backwards. Suspension would have the non-chord tone on this beat and the chord tone on this beat. So it's a reversal of that paradigm. So it has the non-chord tone on this beat and the chord tone on this beat. So basically this is not suspending a chord tone over the beat, causing it to become a non-chord tone. This is basically anticipating the chord tone a little early. So this is an anticipation. So there's lots of anticipations, or there's a few anticipations in this song. So like if you're writing a pop song, that might be something to kind of think about, or any song. or a piece. It takes a little bit of foresight, right? You've got to basically, you have to think about the note as both not fitting in the current chord, but fitting in the next chord. So you've got to do a little foresight, have a little foresight in order for that to work. But there's a lot of stuff that you can kind of discern. So I guess I think I'm pretty satisfied with what we've come up with. Just if you see repeated non-chord tones, just think about them as repeated neighbor tones, repeated passing tones. That's the best I think we can come up with, because if just to pretend that they were longer, right? Instead of being 2/8 notes, just pretend that there were 1/4 note, for instance. So I think we did a pretty good job of analyzing this song. We got a little drop of Jupiter just now. So let's see. Let's take a look at another example. Oh, escape. I wonder if they use escape tones. All right, let's see. I should know more of these songs. I should play one of these a day. By the way, if I stumble across a song and you want to just do it, just tell me. Oh, Eye of the Tiger. Let's do this one, okay? This gets a little jazzy though. I will say that. Wait, this is wrong. Wait, no, I'm playing it wrong. Right? So let's see. So what do we have here? We've got a C minor chord. Now this is a little obnoxious, right? We're getting back to this kind of paradigm of what we were talking about over here, of like underlying chords and implied extensions, right? Because let's look at this G. Does the G fit into a C minor triad? It does. It's the fifth. But does this B flat fit into this C minor triad? Does not. But does the B flat fit into a C minor chord that we know of? Sorry, I'm not sure. I see lips moving, but I'm not sure if you were meant to unmute your microphone or something. I always like to bring that up just because I don't want to deliberately ignore someone. So so this B flat does not fit into a C minor triad, but it fits into a C minor seventh chord. So this is like, you could think about this as being a non-chord tone, but that doesn't really make sense, right? This is like a really good example of what I was talking about over here. Like it becomes a little more obscure when you start making the chords bigger and bigger, but when you have like a familiar chord and you're like, well, why didn't they just call this a C minor 7 chord? The reason they didn't is because I think in the piano part, there's just a triad. It's like, so the piano chord isn't doing this. It's a very subtle difference. But from a melodic analysis perspective, it probably makes more sense to kind of reconcile the differences here instead of treating them as separate things, right? Because this would be a real pain to kind of think of as like a non-chord tone. It would be like a leap to a non-chord tone and then returning to a chord tone. It's like an escape tone, but it's not approached by step. So it's easier for us to just think of this as a chord tone. And then what do we have here? So what we have basically here is we have an A flat major inversion. Because if you remember, if we have in the numerator, we have a chord, and in the denominator, this note belongs to this chord, we're just dealing with an inversion. This is the bass note, and this is the chord, and this bass note does indeed belong to this chord by default, so it's just flipping it so that the C is on bottom. And what we see here is this F. Does this F fit into an A flat major chord? It doesn't, right? An F doesn't fit into an A flat major chord. So, I mean, we're dealing with this now, but this E flat does. This E flat does fit into it. So we're dealing with a situation where chord tone, non-chord tone, chord tone, but this is accented. So there's two things you can call this, I think. You can call this an accented passing tone, or I think you could technically call this like an appoggiatura as well. So there's a couple of things that you can do with this particular arrangement. But with that being said, this chord tone, this is a chord tone. Now, what do we have here? Well, we're in the same situation. Because let's think about this. This G, does this G fit into an A flat major chord? It doesn't, but it does fit into an A flat major 7 chord. So you could consider this for an analysis perspective. You could call this like a chord tone, but you could put like an X on it or an E to say it's an extension of the chord tone or something. And then we have here, you could consider this a passing tone going back to a chord tone. Or you can kind of think about, I mean, there's many ways you can think about this. You could be like, well, I'm going to treat this as a chord tone too. And just treat this as like an extension of like, make this an A flat 6 chord, for instance. So there's many ways you can think about this, depending on what you reconcile and what you don't reconcile, like what you decide to treat as what you decide to imply or what you don't decide to imply from this chord symbol. But with that being said, there's a lot of good stuff that you can take from this. And analysis isn't very dry. There are some subjective implications to it, but that is where it's supposed to be useful. It's not supposed to be boring, because why? Yeah, it's supposed to illuminate something. Just keep remembering that. Don't be discouraged by this process. Just realize that it's supposed to be thought-provoking. So with that being said, let's do a little bit of musicianship. Let's actually try to see if we can't, maybe I'll pull up this book to start, okay? Eyes and Ears, okay? So what do we have here? Let's actually just do a little bit of warm up, okay? Just warm up your voice, just ah, ah, ah. Move your body, ah, ah. You know, shake it out, ah, ah, ah. Preferably you're standing up. I know I'm sitting down because I'm playing piano. Ah, 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 ah. Ooh. Okay. Just get like your range kind of revved up a little bit. Okay. So let's see. We're in this example. We're going to start with this example. So what key are we in this example?
G major.
We're in G major, exactly. So we're in G major. And now let's think about what this means. So we're in G major, and we could even think about some of the chord tones in this example, but we'll forego that for the time being. So we're in the key of G major. What is the solfege starting note for this particular passage? So if this is do, re, mi, fa, so. Okay, so it's so. So let's see. So. Let's just do this warm up really quickly. So, fa, mi, re, do. Go. So, fa, mi, re, do. 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 Okay, so let's start with this so. Now we have dotted eighths to sixteenths, okay? So let's do so, la, so, fa, mi, re, la, so. Okay? 1, 2, ready, go. So, la, so, fa, mi, re, la, so, re, fa, mi, do. So, la, so, fa, mi, re, la, so, re, fa, mi, do. Okay? Let's do it a little faster. 1, 2, ready, go. So, la, so, fa, mi, re, la, so, re, fa, mi, do. So, la, so, fa, mi, re, la, so, re, fa, mi, do. Okay? Okay, let's do this. Do the next exercise. We're in the key of G major, so we can kind of stay in the same tonality. Let's start with this one. Let's start with do, okay? 2, ready, go. Do, re, mi, re, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, re, do, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, so, la, fa, so, mi, do, mi, re, la, ti, do, la, ti, do, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do. Okay. Now, I noticed as soon as I started that this exercise is trying to trick us into trying to confuse staccatos with long notes, the kind of dots associated with extending a note instead of just articulating a note more shortly, right? So what that means is you just have to play this really short and snappy. Dot, da, 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 dot, da, 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 dot, da, 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 da. That's a little weird, okay? Da, 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 3, da, da. It's just like, it's leaving out these other 2 16, so it feels kind of syncopated. Da, 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 da. This is the blank space Taylor Swift rhythm. Da, 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 da. So basically, this gets very, this blank space kind of feels different from the rest of it, okay? Let's do this one more time. Just watch out for the larger intervals, like perfect fifths, sixths, okay, fifths, octaves, fourths, okay. 1, 2, ready, go. Do, do, re, mi, re, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, re, do, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, so, la, fa, so, mi, do, mi, re, la, ti, do, la, ti, do, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do. There's this idea when you repeat something that a lot of times you want to do the repetition a little differently. So like you have la, ti, do. I do the repetition a little softer. Da, la, ti, do. And then I go back to normal volume. Fa, mi, re, do, ti, do. Okay. Oh, let's try this. We're going to move to a different key. Oh, interesting. That was from an aria. We were singing an operatic figure. Giovanni Battista Pergolesi, aria from Stabat Mater. The more you know. So let's try this one. We're in the key of D major now, so this is going to be do. Do, la, ti, do, re, mi. Yeah, I'm going to mess this up, I know. This is tricky because look at these leaps. This is not easy. And this is from Bach, from a cello suite. So this is not going to be easy. No. Okay, let's just do it. Okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna mess up. But I'm gonna start and try it anyway. I can sing this, but I'm gonna mess up the solfege syllables because I'm gonna think about it in fixed instead of movable. I'm just gonna sing it really quickly just to get an idea. Oh, you know what? I realized I was playing this entirely wrong. I was playing this in treble clef instead of bass clef. Oh. Whoops. Okay, let's see if we can do this. This is me, starting on me. Me, ready, 2, go. Mi, do, re, mi, fa, so, fa, la, ti, re, do, ti, la, ti, so, fa, mi, wait, mi, la, so, fa, mi, re, so, mi, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la, so, la, do, re. I apologize, class. So, la, re, do, re, mi, ti. Let's do this one more time. So what we have here is mi, la, so, fa, mi, re, fa, mi, la, so, fa, mi, re, fa. This is why it's good to warm up your voice. Ah, because you're actually have to sing these leaps. This is not a very singable passage, but it's fun to sing, but it's just strange to sing. Okay, let's do it again. 2, go. Mi, do, re, mi, fa, so, fa, la, ti, re, do, ti, la, ti, so, fa, mi, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. I'm messing this up. I'm messing this up because this is not mi, la. This is mi, do. Mi, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do, fa, mi, fa, so, re. So that's even bigger of a leap. That's ridiculous. Mi, do, mi, do. That's quite a leap. Whew. Let's do this one more time. 2, mi. Mi, do, re, mi, fa, so, fa, la, ti, re, do, ti, la, ti, so, fa, mi, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do, fa, mi, fa, so, re. Okay. Okay. Let's go on to C major. This exercise seems like child's play compared to this one, but it's still tricky. It's longer, and it's Brahms. It's introduction to his first symphony. Okay, so I'm going to scroll awkwardly during the middle of the passage, but hopefully you can follow along. Okay. So, do. Okay. So, do. 1, 2, 3. So, do, ti, do, la. So, do, re, mi, do, re, so, do, ti, do, la. So, do, re, mi, fa, mi, do, re, do, so, re, mi, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, mi, ti, do, la, so, re, mi, fa, so, re, mi, re, la, ti, so, la, fa, so, la, fa, mi, re, do. Okay, that was actually not very easy either, to be honest. You know what? I've got this transpose function on my keyboard. Maybe I'll take advantage of it. So, do, ti. Okay. Let's go a little faster too. It's hard to sing that slowly, especially for these long notes. Ready? 2, 3. So, do, ti, do, la. So, do, re, do, re. So, do, ti, do, la. So, do, re, mi, fa, mi, do, re, do. So, re, mi, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, mi, ti, do, la. So, re, mi, fa, so, re, mi, re, la, ti, so, la, fa, so, la, fa, mi, re, do. Let's do that last bit. That's a little tricky. Ready, go. So, 3, go. So, re, mi, fa, so, re, mi, re, la, ti. Let's do that again. Ready, go. So, re, mi, fa, so, re, mi, re, la, ti. One last time for good luck. Ready, go. So, re, mi, fa, so, re, mi, re, la, ti. So, la, fa, so, la, fa, mi, re, do. Okay? Tricky, tricky, tricky. Are these all? Oh, interesting. Okay. There's lots of interesting exercises here. Professional march song from Germany. Okay. So we're in the key of D major. So what we're dealing with at the beginning is so, because this is A, and A is the fifth in the key of D major. Of course, I've turned on my transpose just to make it a little easier for both you and me. So I don't have to transpose on the piano. I can just press a button and it'll be in a more comfortable range. Re. I probably turn off transpose for this because that's too low. Oh, did I turn it off? Re. Okay, cool. Let's do this one, okay? Let's just do this. Whatever happens, happens. Ready? 2, 3. My bad. This is so. 1, 2, 3. So, do, mi, re, do, la, so, do, la, re, so, fa, mi, re, so, re, do, ti, la, so. Wait, I'm messing this up so badly. Mi, re, do, ti, la, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do. So, ti, so, ti, do, re, so, do, re, mi, do, re, so, do, mi, re, so, fa, mi, re, so, mi, re, do, ti, la, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do. Okay. Well, with that being said, I guess you can march right out of class as it's the end of class. I actually I can't stick around for too long after class today because I've got another meeting, but I can schedule office hours if you'd like to meet and talk. But with that being said, thank you so much, and I will see you on Thursday.
Do you have like a minute or no? Not at all.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Natalie. Hi, Natalia. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing better. I wanted to talk to you because I've been kind of really slacking in this class,
Oh, so one
and
sec. Let me actually pause the recording.